Thanks for checking out another new podcast from the Association for Materials Protection and Performance. Of course, we're best known as AMP for short. Again, I'm your host, Ben Dubose, news editor with the AMP Publications team. In that role, I create content for both Coatings Pro Magazine and Materials Performance Magazine, both of which are member magazines of AMP. Today, to speak about the increasing role of artificial intelligence, or AI, in protective coatings, as well as other market segments within materials protection and corrosion control, we're speaking with Greg Mulholland, the founder and CEO of Citrine Informatics. Citrine was founded in 2013. Greg, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. And let's just start with introductions. As mentioned, you founded and helped start up Citrine in 2013. It's been quite a journey over the last decade or so. Just tell us a bit about the background of your career and what all led to that, as well as the types of markets and market segments that Citrine operates in today.
Well, thanks a lot, Ben, and it's a pleasure to be here and really exciting to be talking to your audience. When we started Citrine, it was really informed by my career experience and those of my co-founders. I actually started in semiconductor engineering, which was a pretty far distance from coatings, at least in material space. But I was shocked when I started in that industry about how we were using data and how we weren't using data. Actually, most of what we saw when I was running engineering in a small semiconductor company, we were doing a lot of intuitive calculations. We were sort of analyzing data in Excel and using smaller data analysis. And it just felt like with the amount of money we were spending per experiment, we should be doing something better. We should be actually making the most of our data. And at the time, I tried. We did a bunch of statistical stuff and tried to see what we could make happen. But ultimately, it was sort of a bit of a dead end. This was in kind of 08 and 09. By the time I had spent several years at that company, I decided to come out to Stanford and ultimately met my co-founder there. We were in business school together. And he was also a material scientist. And he was a material scientist that had specifically focused on developing machine learning for materials. That was what his PhD was on. And at the time, we thought, hey, maybe this is the answer. Maybe there's a way for us to use this very specialty machine learning. Now, I guess AI, it's a flavor of AI, certainly, to use this technology to enhance the development of the next generation of clean, sustainable, and high-performance materials. And so we decided to get started in 2013. We actually did start in hard materials. So we have a pretty robust business in structural materials and semiconductors and electronics. But over the last 10 years, we've really seen a pivot into both higher velocity and more organic-oriented materials domains. And so paints and coatings is one of our largest segments. We also operate in things like personal care, where so some of the coating mechanics are the same and many are very different because you have skin contact. And we've seen a really positive effect on using data to basically get to next-generation products and refine the products you have much, much more quickly. In some cases, in 98 or 99% less time, which is just obviously a really big success when we see that.
So if you go to Citrine's website, which you can at citrine.io, you can see the industries, a list of those that you all serve, and those relevant to AMP's audience, certainly coatings, adhesives, sealants, elastomers, also metals and alloys. So lots of industries that tie into materials protection, corrosion control, certainly protective coatings. In terms of making the link and illustrating how AI can change these industries in the future, what are some more concrete examples of what your platform and this system that you've developed can potentially do in those industries? Can you sort of make the case for how this actually plays out for someone that's looking at this fairly abstractly?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a question we get commonly. So the way I like to describe this is for a long time, basically the entire history of chemistry, we have been designing new chemicals, materials, trying to do experiments to achieve some outcome. And we generally try to optimize one thing. So in a coating, you might be looking at some sort of adhesion strength or some sort of toughness or, one characteristic. And humans are pretty good at that. I like to tell people lighter isn't harder, stronger isn't harder. It's lighter and stronger that's harder. And I think, that exists in coatings as well. You want durable and environmentally friendly, as an example. And so what AI allows us to do is it allows us to take advantage of what computers are best at. And that is multidimensional optimization, the ability to hold all of these considerations in memory at the same time, and then use a human's intuition and capability on top of that to design a new coding. So say, for example, one very common example for us is removal of PFAS. Your audience probably is very familiar with the fluorinated substances that are causing so much trouble for a lot of the industry. And it turns out that PFAS is kind of a wonder molecule and fluorine is kind of a wonder atom. And so to remove that from products is pretty tough. You can't just do a drop-in for everything. You need to kind of product by product go and find a replacement for that molecule. And what we're seeing is the ability to optimize to a refined recipe, a new formulation of a particular product that performs exactly the same, but actually takes out PFAS and holds all other properties the same, is actually a really compelling use case of AI, because it's very hard for a human to say, well, here's all the roles that this fluorinated molecule or set of molecules is playing in this particular product. It's really hard for a human to go and systematically find something new that plays an appropriate set of those roles. And so what AI allows us to do is basically look for highly correlated relationships within these codings, and then basically come up with new hypothetical codings that are likely to achieve the goal that you're trying to get to. And what we often see there is it's a back and forth with the scientist. A scientist will say, well, I don't like this aspect of what the system came up with, but I do think this other thing is clever. So I'm going to take that and try something else for the part that I don't like, which is fine, because AI is not intended to replace the scientist. It's intended to be a power tool for a scientist to be able to make the most of their own expertise, rather than kind of dredging through old school data and trying to use their human brain to find correlations that may or may not be there.
Let's drill down a little deeper within the codings market specifically. What are some of the areas of the coding formulation process that could be influenced in or by AI through that process?
Yeah, so typically we see that our codings customers, and really mostly across the board, all of our customers care about three things. The first is always performance. If you don't have a performant product, you can't sell it. And so every one of our customers is doing some sort of performance optimization, and usually that's of the variety I just mentioned a little while ago, which is, how do I improve multiple characteristics of this material without sacrificing the others that I might care about? The second characteristic is cost. So it turns out that in the coatings industry, from what we have seen, many of our customers run into cases where their coding recipes are the things that they have sort of built up over years. And so a lot of times they're not really optimized. You don't want to mess with a good thing. And so we found the ability of AI to actually refine those formulations, figure out, actually, you don't need these ingredients. Or by substituting one ingredient for another, you can actually increase the amount of filler in this product, or you might be able to decrease the amount of an expensive additive by rebalancing a formulation. So cost is absolutely a huge benefit. And then the third, and this is actually the hardest technically, is sustainability. So it turns out that, everyone feels the pressure to be more sustainable, both for consumer preference reasons and for regulatory reasons. And what we're finding is AI is very good at saying, here are the characteristics of the molecules and products we're using today that actually enable our product to be good. So, there might have an additive that is petroleum derived, and you can say, well, this is what makes it actually helpful to our coating. And then what the AI can do is it can say, well, here is a portfolio of organic molecules that are likely, and when I say organic molecules, I mean bio-derived molecules, that can actually swap in some volume for those petrochemically derived additives. And so it's not just additives, you can do that across the board. But when you put together that portfolio, what I think of as sort of the materials triangle of performance, cost, and sustainability, what it allows you to do is sort of use a joystick to move around the space and say, well, I want a really sustainable product, but I'm willing to sacrifice a little cost. Or I want to find a perfect balance among performance and sustainability and cost, in which case probably nothing will be completely standout, but it will allow you to make meaningful steps forward, where it would be really challenging for a human to balance all of those competing priorities in their head and scientific principles in their head all at once.
So what feedback have you heard from some of the people in the coding space, the companies that have actually adopted these technologies? What have they told you when they've increasingly branched into this space?
Yeah, I would say it's been really interesting. I've learned so much about this industry and how both technical it is. I mean, codings are very complicated, and I think many people do not entirely appreciate that. But it's also there's also a cultural change involved. So I will say where we have seen tremendous success is on the technical front. We consistently help our coatings customers remove toxic ingredients, lower cost, increase performance, and we do it in a way that allows their scientists to work on their own. So we build software, we train people in using our software, and then they then go use our software. And so it's not like we're a consulting firm out there kind of trying to invent things on your behalf. You have the expertise, we don't, at least not as deep as yours. But the other, and we see just tremendous positive technical benefit to that. The challenge always with every one of our customers, even the most technically successful, is often presented by leadership. There's been a lot of noise about AI. And anyone who's tried ChatGPT, I think, had the same experience I did, which was at first, this is amazing. And then over time, this is amazing, but relatively limited in what it can do. And what we've seen is there's that healthy skepticism going into any AI adoption now. And so what we're finding is starting with a few projects to show that AI can work is a really great place to start. And then having an organizational cultural thrust to try to actually adopt AI in a much more aggressive way is what our most successful customers do. Because if you wait for people to organically come around, you're falling behind every second. And we're very good at evangelizing these things and always happy to do that. But for us, the technical success is the easy part, which is not what I expected when we started the company.
We've talked for the first few minutes of this podcast about how we got here and your process at Citrine, getting from launching the company in 2013 to the increasing adoption in recent years. I'm curious your perspective within the coatings market specifically on where we're going the next few years in terms of industry trends, in terms of new regulations. How can your processes, how can AI potentially help those clients adapt to what's coming down the pike the next few years?
Yeah, and this is what drives a lot of companies to get in touch with us in the first place. I will say there are two things that we're seeing, two very large trends that we're seeing. One is obviously regulatory. We are, I think, going through a period of uncertainty about what regulation will look like, whether in the U.S. or abroad. But the arc of regulation is certainly heading in a direction of more sustainable and lower liability risk, frankly, for using ingredients that might not be as sustainable, in addition to, obviously, consumer preference. That's the first one, and I think that one's relatively easy for anybody in the industry to see. The question is, on what timeline is the pressure high? The other trend that we're really seeing, though, is around highly tailored products going into their sort of end uses. By that, I mean, for a long time, you could come up with a new material or come up with a new coating, and it was just excellent on every front. And it would go in everything. This was kind of the point around a lot of the fluorinated materials, PFAS, PFOA, that kind of thing. What we're finding now is with a desire to be more sustainable and with a desire to push performance, you can't just sell the same coating into multiple application areas. And in some cases, I'm thinking about things like consumer electronic screens, the oleophobic coating there. A lot of times companies want you to specifically customize what the performance is to their particular use case so they can have a really differentiated product. And so we're seeing application engineering has always been there. Technical services has always been there, but we've seen a big push into more customized products, more tailored products with very specific performance characteristics. And I think that kind of started with Apple early on and the iPhone kind of really pushing their suppliers, but now it's becoming more of a macro trend. And so AI allows us to respond to these things much more quickly. If you can take what was a maybe 5 or 10 or 20 week application engineering effort, depending on the domain, and get it down to a week or two by using AI and then just a couple experiments to dial in that recipe, it actually allows you to get back to your customer much faster. It allows you to achieve a higher degree of performance at a lower cost, and it leads to healthier businesses. And we've seen companies win new contracts simply because they were faster. And in many cases, that's because of Citrine, and we're really proud of being able to have that effect.
So that answer addressed how the market is potentially changing and how Citrine and AI can play into that. I'm curious also how AI is potentially going to evolve and change in the years ahead. When you look at what technology is on the horizon, what might be different in a year or two or 5 years from now, and what opportunities might that open up within coatings or any materials that can, protect assets from corrosion?
Yeah, so we're in a really interesting phase in the AI journey right now because so far basically anyone who's said anything about AI over the last several years has basically been proved wrong 6 to 12 months later. Now, maybe they are right over the long term, but the reality is, we haven't achieved artificial general intelligence, which is sort of the super brain that people sometimes worry about and people sometimes are excited about. And I don't know that we will. At least not in the very, very near term. I think that bar is very, very high. With that said, AI technology is moving so fast. I mean, it is, even at Citrine, we are using AI in new and clever ways within our products and within our company, just not even in a product-facing way, just, in optimizing how we operate. And so AI is certainly accelerating quickly. I think in the coatings industry, there's really a couple key things that I think we need to watch out for. And they're mostly positive for the industry, but important to adopt. The first is we have a great degree of knowledge in our coatings technology, right? All of your listeners are experts in their various fields, and we have an understanding as a scientific community about how coatings work. That is often in people's brains, and it's often written down in things like peer-reviewed publications or technical papers or textbooks, right? With these LLMs that have come out, we now have a way of reading them. Previous NLP technology, it was useful for some stuff, but in general, it was not that useful for like highly technical knowledge extraction in a reliable way. And LLMs still aren't perfect for that, but you can imagine with the text processing that we're seeing now, being able to learn from these ideas rather than just numerical data is a pretty compelling opportunity. The second piece that I would say is our interfaces. It's interesting that we've developed this entirely new paradigm of computing and AI, launched it broadly, and I'm still talking to you through a microphone attached to a laptop. I'm still typing regularly into my computer. I am not really using AI as an interface, but that is obviously going to change. Anthropic released the Computer Control API for Claude, which actually you can give it control of your computer, and it will use a mouse and keyboard to navigate around as you tell it what you want it to do. Now, for security reasons, I've not tried that because I don't trust anybody to control my computer entirely, but it's a cool idea. And obviously, the longer term answer there is somewhat different in terms of interface, but like the idea is similar. So I think we're going to see both of these technical aspects as well as user interface aspects fundamentally upend what we do. And quite honestly, if I think about the workforce of the future, it needs to be people who understand chemistry deeply as now, but it also needs to be people that are comfortable adapting to new and changing technologies because technology is not slowing down and it's not going to for a very long time.
Make the pitch for someone listening that might not have much experience at all with AI for why this is the appropriate spot to potentially get started. If they don't know or have that much personal experience with their company or their business, but they've certainly heard about it, there's intrigue, why is this the right time to get started, and how should they get off the ground if they don't have much in the way of past experience with this?
Yeah, it's a good question and one we get commonly. So the AI creates this interesting, some people call it a flywheel effect. I don't love that term, but it does illustrate it rather neatly. Because AI learns from the data that you have, it actually learns best from the ways it's wrong. I like to think about this like teaching a little kid. You can give lectures all day long about how to ride a bike, but the way to teach a kid to ride a bike is to help them with training wheels or a trainer bike or whatever the thing is you're using, and you help them and you guardrail them a little bit, but they need to learn how to move their feet and move their hands and control their body. And in a lot of ways, that is how AI is. It needs to learn from the ways it's messing up as it's actually in the world. And so the way I see people fail is they say, oh, we're going to go organize our data going back to 1952 or whenever we have data to, and we'll come back and use AI when the data is all there. And actually, that is not the way to get started. The way to get started is to pull together for a single, not usually a single, for usually 2 or 3 projects that are currently under development, usually under a relatively short timeline. We're not talking about the 5-year development project here. We're talking about the 6 to 12 month development project. And go and collect the data that you have at hand. Make it easy. And then with Citrine, you can use as little as 50 or 100 data points. You bring in that data and you actually start. You prove to yourself that the system can work. And the reason you need to do that is because as the system guides you and suggests experiments and you choose to do them, the system will learn faster and faster. And so if you wait, you're not gaining the benefit of those learning cycles, both for yourself and for the software system, and your competitors are. And so there is not a company out there today that is not at least thinking about AI, and the best companies are already adopting it in their product development portfolios, and it's an accretive technology. So as you use it, it gets better and better and better. And so you can think about it like a race. It's a car race. You're first off the line and the other person's asleep at the wheel. They're not going to have a chance to catch up because you already are accelerating and running full speed. And this is very similar. And so I think it's actually a critical time. I think the best companies are adopting AI pretty aggressively in their product development portfolios and are doing it in a step-by-step way, but with a very strong, we're going to make this work, we're going to make this a core part of our strategy sort of attitude.
What resources are out there if someone hears that and wants to learn more about what those next steps potentially are? What resources do you all have at Citrine or elsewhere on the web? What's out there for listeners to potentially learn what the opportunities actually are?
So here's where we're really lucky. And I mean, on the Citrine side, we obviously have, we give webinars and talks and have, we're glad to meet with you one-on-one if you'd like and walk you through how it works and what the case is to be made and those sorts of things. Please just reach out to me and I'll give my contact information at the end. But the public resources, we're actually very lucky because the academic community started in this world of AI for materials, machine learning for materials, well before the commercial world did, and even a little bit before Citrine. We started in 2013, and we were the first commercial company, but there were academics doing it before. So there's good courseware out there, and you can find things. Materials Project at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab has resources and things to read and watch. Like I said, we have webinars, and there's a number of people in the community. I would recommend that you look at the national labs are a really good resource for this in some cases. And then of course, I think understanding the broader machine learning landscape is really important. And so, I don't think you need to go take 12 courses on OpenCourseWare to fully understand AI, but there are a lot of great YouTube videos and even, OpenCourseWare and Coursera and that kind of thing, where you can find some decent overviews of how these things work, descriptions of how these things work, so you can have a grounding in what is required independent of materials, just what is required in the data world. Though please don't over-rotate on the data volume questions. In materials, it's a little bit different than the rest of the machine learning world.
Are there any extra benefits potentially to our audience that you haven't discussed already? I think you've done a good job of sort of laying out the nuts and bolts of how this works and what the primary reasons and benefits would be. Is there anything else potentially supplemental that's out there or perhaps coming over the next few years that might help beyond just the obvious reasons that you've already laid out?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 things that I'd like to highlight. One is, we don't have the benefit. If you've used ChatGPT, that's made by a company called OpenAI. And OpenAI has the benefit of, they were the first to train LLMs, these ChatGPT-like systems. They were the first to train them, and so they went out and they read the whole internet basically for free. That's good. If you're trying to replicate text, the internet is full of text. And the lawsuits from New York Times and elsewhere notwithstanding about copyright, people, they learned a lot from what's out there. In the chemicals and materials industry, and definitely the coatings industry, a lot of the technology that we have, the materials and chemicals technology, is proprietary. So it's not out there that just anybody can read. And so that is really your competitive advantage, both in terms of data and the knowledge of your people. If you can couple that with AI, you can get a really, really big benefit. So I think that's the first piece, is making sure that you're not just assuming that, data's out there. No one has data. And your scientists actually have knowledge, which in some cases is even more valuable than data. And Citrine, our AI specifically, is meant to work on that very small data and allow your scientists to integrate that domain knowledge, which has two effects. One is it makes the model better, and the second is it makes that domain knowledge portable. So if you have, three groups working on three different projects with related chemistries in some distant way, you can actually trade those models and help people train one against another and actually learn faster across a much larger group than humans could do. The other technology piece that's coming around the bend is a little bit what I mentioned around learning from kind of various domain knowledge outside of specific scientists. There's a lot of exciting things happening in text processing. There's a lot of exciting things happening in pulling out theory. And I actually think we're on the precipice of a new scientific revolution where we can start to think about things not as these long narrative stories that we once thought about, these journal articles and the like, but we start thinking about things in terms of goals and accomplishments and understanding relationships in a structured way. And I really believe that AI is critical to that because it's the way AI processes best. And it's a way that humans and computers can work together in concert to achieve something much greater than either one could do on their own. And like I said, we often see a 98% reduction in the length of time it takes to get to that endpoint, which as a business leader, if I could reduce anything by 98%, I would almost certainly, any time by 98%, I would almost always take that because faster is always better.
All right. Great insight there from Greg Mulholland, founder and CEO of Citrine Informatics. Greg, before we let you go, you mentioned contact info for listeners that might want to get in touch with you or learn more about Citrine. What are the best ways that they can do that?
So our website is certainly the best front door. It's Citrine, as you said, citrine.io. You can also email me, Greg, Greg, at citrine.io, or info@citrine.io, and that will get you to our commercial team. They're happy to bring in the right technical folks. And then on social media, we primarily post on LinkedIn. So that's where I'd have you look for us, Citrine Informatics, exactly as it sounds, INFORMATICS. And we look forward to talking to your listeners if they're interested. And this has been a fun conversation. Thanks a lot, Ben.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the time. All right. And with that, we will bring this episode to a close. On behalf of AMP and the publications team within AMP, I'm Ben Dubose. And if you want more resources from us, just visit amp.org, ampp.org, codingsformag.com, or materialsperformance.com. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with another new episode.